in, everybody, to Study Hall. Settle in for our segment, but why, though? Where we explore the origins of everything. You know, I'm always up for a good origin story.
And I'm excited to dig into this one with you.
Yeah.
You've gathered some really interesting material for today.
Yeah, well, I try. We've got historical accounts, anthropological perspectives, analyses of societal shifts.
A real deep dive.
You know it. And all of this to tackle a question that, well, frankly, I think about a lot. Where did partnerships and marriage even come from?
That's a big one.
It is. But we're not talking about, the modern traditions, white dress, the whole 9 yards.
Right, we're going further back.
Way back.
Yeah.
Before any formal institutions even existed.
Before I do.
Exactly. So our mission today is to understand the human needs at the heart of partnerships and marriage. Why do we do this thing?
Core drivers. I like it.
So what did human connection and social structure look like before anyone uttered those two fateful words? And how on earth did we get from there to where we are today?
Well, let's rewind the clock to those pre-marriage societies and lay the groundwork.
Let's do it. So paint a picture for us. What were those earliest foundations like?
I think the most striking feature when you look at societies before formal marriage is the centrality of kinship. These extended kinship networks were the backbone of early human societies. It wasn't the nuclear family, mom, dad, and the kids like we often think of today. It was much broader than that.
So more like a massive family reunion that never ends?
That's a fun way to think about it. Everyone was connected, shared responsibilities, resources. It was a whole community functioning as a unit.
Okay, so it was less about my family and more about our community.
Precisely. Child rearing, gathering food, all of it was distributed across the group. Communal child rearing was a big thing, and everyone contributed their labor to ensure the survival of the whole.
I wonder what our listeners think about that. Imagine a world where your support network wasn't just your immediate family, but the entire community. Would that be a utopia? A bit overwhelming? Let us know what you think.
It's definitely a different way of life than what most of us are used to. And within these kinship structures, the idea of a singular, exclusive partnership wasn't necessarily the default either.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, your research indicates that polygamy was pretty prevalent. We're talking both polygyny, where one man has multiple wives, and polyandry, one woman with multiple husbands. And even polyamorous relationships where multiple partners are involved.
So basically not your typical meet cute, fall in love, get married scenario.
Not quite. These arrangements serve very specific purposes in those societies. For instance, polygyny in some African societies was often linked to economic advantages. A larger family meant more hands to work the land, which obviously led to greater prosperity. Then you have something like fraternal polyandry in the Tibetan Plateau, where brothers would share a wife to prevent the division of family land.
Interesting. So in those cases, marriage was more about practicality, ensuring the survival and success of the group. It wasn't always about those heart-fluttering emotions we associate with it now.
Exactly. It was about forging alliances, securing resources, and ensuring the continuation of the lineage. And even in polyamorous arrangements, which we see in some tribal cultures, the focus was often on collective harmony and shared responsibilities. Childcare, resource distribution, everyone pitched in. So it challenged our modern emphasis on monogamy as the only way to meet those needs for connection and support.
So even back then, there wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach to partnerships. It seems like there were some rituals and customs that guided these unions, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. Tribal and customary pairings were incredibly important in strengthening social bonds and transmitting culture. These rituals weren't about romantic love as much as they were about reinforcing the communal fabric of the tribe.
I'm thinking of things like the dowry and the bride price. Can you tell us more about those?
Of course. The dowry, which is property or money brought by the bride to her husband's family, and the bride price, a gift from the groom or his family to the brides, were essentially formal exchanges between families that underlined the communal aspect of the union. It wasn't just two individuals joining. It was an alliance between two kinship groups.
An alliance sealed with, gifts?
Exactly. And for a specific example, look at the Iroquois Confederacy. They had matrilineal traditions, which means lineage and inheritance passed through the mother's line. And women held a lot of authority in choosing or even ending marriages.
That's a pretty different picture from what we typically think of when it comes to historical marriages.
It is. It challenges our assumptions about gender roles and power dynamics in those early partnerships. And beyond these more formal arrangements, there There were also many informal and fluid partnerships.
So not every couple walked down the aisle or whatever the equivalent was back then.
Not at all. Many partnerships in those early societies were driven by mutual benefit, cooperation, or the need to forge alliances. Permanence wasn't always the main goal. It was all very flexible and adaptable to the needs of the community and the individuals.
So breaking up was easier back then. No messy divorce proceedings.
Well, it wasn't a legal process like it is today, but the sources suggest that if a partnership wasn't working out or no longer served its purpose, separation was usually accepted. It was seen as a necessary realignment within the community. No lawyers needed.
Fascinating. So when we zoom out and consider this whole pre-marriage era, what's the takeaway about the fundamental human needs that were being met through these diverse partnership structures?
It seems that those kinship networks were the primary way that early societies met the core human needs for connection and social structure. Connection meaning that sense of belonging, interdependence, and support that we all crave, and social structure, which provided defined roles, responsibilities, and a sense of order within the group. In essence, the entire community acted as the safety net and support system that we associate with the nuclear family today.
It's a pretty radical shift from how we think about family and community now. But things started to change as we move into the medieval period, right? More formal, less communal.
You got it. The Catholic Church really steps in and starts shaping marriage as an institution.
Yeah, it's not just about kinship anymore. So what happens? How does marriage change?
Well, marriage begins to be seen as sacred, not just a social contract or an economic arrangement, but a bond blessed by God. And with that comes rules.
Rules? Always with the rules. What kind of rules are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, mutual consent between the partners. That becomes crucial. You can't just be forced into a marriage anymore, at least in theory.
Progress.
Right. And they also couldn't be too closely related, no close kinship. And the public vows become a central element. This is when the wedding ceremony, the ritual, starts to solidify as we know it.
Ah, so this is where speak now or forever hold your peace enters with the picture.
Exactly. And this also leads to the practice of announcing those marriage bans in church. Remember those?
Vaguely. Remind me why that was a thing again.
Well, the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 makes it official that those bans need to be published. And it's not just about religious tradition either. It's about preventing those secret marriages, those runaway in the night situations.
Ah, so Romeo and Juliet wouldn't have stood a chance.
Not a chance. By announcing the intention to marry, the church wanted to ensure everyone knew about it, especially the families. Particularly important for the nobility, for whom marriage was very much a strategic alliance.
So it was a way to prevent family feuds and drama.
Exactly. It also provided a chance for anyone to come forward if there was a reason the marriage shouldn't happen. Like if the couple was too closely related, a major no-no for the church.
Keeping it all in the family, but not too close.
Right. And then, of course, it helped to legitimize the marriage in the eyes of the church. Especially important for questions of inheritance and all that. Basically, the church was solidifying its authority over the whole institution of marriage.
Wow, so the church really starts shaping not just the spiritual side of marriage, but also the social and legal aspects. They really were a powerhouse back then.
Absolutely. But even with the church's influence, the experience of marriage in medieval times varied wildly depending on whether you were a noble or a commoner.
Right. Society was still deeply divided. So let's talk about the nobility first. What was marriage all about for them?
Power, my friend, power. For the nobility, marriage was primarily about consolidating power, increasing wealth, and expanding land ownership through strategic alliances. They weren't exactly looking for love. They were looking for political leverage and economic advantage.
So those royal weddings were less about romance and more about forging alliances.
Think Game of Thrones, but in real life. Women often had very little say in the matter. Their marriages were arranged to benefit their families. It was all about maintaining and strengthening their position within the feudal system.
So basically a high-stakes game of chess with real people as the pieces.
A perfect analogy. And the dowry played a key role in sealing these deals. Huge amounts of land, money, or valuables would change hands to solidify the alliance. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was serious business.
So no pressure on the happy couple then. And what about the common folk? Their lives were so different from the nobility. How did that play into their partnerships?
For the lower classes, marriage was much more about survival. It was about finding a partner who could contribute to the household economy, share the burden of work, and help raise a family.
So love wasn't a factor.
I'm sure love existed, but it wasn't the primary motivator. The harsh realities of life meant that practicality often trumped romance. If you were a farmer, You needed someone who could work the land alongside you. It was about finding a partner who could help you make ends meet.
A teammate more than a soulmate.
Exactly. Now, they did have more freedom in choosing their partners compared to the nobility, who were often bound by those political arrangements, but their choices were still limited by their circumstances.
So were there economic exchanges like dowries in those commoner marriages?
There were, but on a much smaller scale, of course. The dowry might be some livestock, tools, or household goods to contribute to the new family. And in some areas, there was this thing called merchet, a fee that a peasant might pay to their lord for the right to marry, kind of like a marriage tax.
Seriously, a tax for getting married? That's rough.
It was a different time, and their marriages weren't always formally recognized by the church either. They'd often rely on local customs and traditions, things like hand fasting.
Hand fasting. Now, that sounds interesting. What's that all about?
It was a less formal type of union, often based on mutual consent and local tradition. They'd literally tie their hands together as a symbol of their commitment. It was more about the community recognizing the union than about getting the church's blessing.
So it was a less formal, more community-centered way of getting hitched. It's fascinating to see how differently marriage functioned depending on your place in society. For the nobles, a strategic move. For commoners, a vital partnership for survival. What a contrast.
A huge contrast,
Yeah.
and it really makes you think about what partnership truly meant in those different contexts. But things start to shift again as we move into the Enlightenment, a time of immense intellectual and social change. And, when ideas change, so do relationships.
The Enlightenment was all about individual rights, reason, and challenging those old traditions. Did that impact marriage?
Oh, absolutely. The idea of marrying for love starts to gain traction, especially among the middle class. Enlightenment philosophers really emphasize those emotional bonds, mutual respect, and personal happiness as being just as important as any practical concerns.
So finally, some romance enters the equation.
Exactly. It was a radical shift from the purely practical and strategic motivations that had dominated marriage for centuries. People started to believe they had the right to choose a partner based on genuine affection and shared values.
That sounds more like the kind of marriage we're familiar with today, and this trend continued into the 19th and 20th centuries, right?
Oh, it did. The Industrial Revolution and urbanization led to major societal changes, and marriage was no exception. The nuclear family becomes more prominent, and ideas of individual choice and consent in marriage really take hold, especially in the West.
And this is also when we see the rise of companionate marriage, right?
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Companionate marriage is all about the idea that spouses should not just be partners in a practical sense, but also close friends, confidants, and emotional equals. Romance, shared interests, and mutual support become the ideal.
So it's not enough to just share a house and raise kids. You gotta genuinely like each other, too.
Exactly. Marriage becomes less about duty and more about fulfilling those emotional needs. And that brings us to the modern era where we see a huge emphasis on romantic love and personal fulfillment.
It's all about finding your soulmate, your one true love. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. Factors like gender equality, the acceptance of divorce, and the recognition of diverse relationships have all contributed to this shift. Marriage is now seen as a choice, a journey undertaken with someone you love and respect, someone who shares your values and helps you grow as a person.
So from arranged marriages to marrying for love, what a journey.
And it's not over yet. In our current era, the way we approach partnerships is constantly evolving. Cohabitation, evolving legal definitions of marriage, and even the way technology impacts how we connect with each other, it's all influencing the landscape of relationships.
It's a lot to process. We've gone from kinship networks to strategic alliances to soulmate searching. It makes you wonder what's next for the institution of marriage.
It does. But if we look back at this incredible journey, we can see how our fundamental human needs for connection and social structure have been met in so many different ways. Those needs have always been there, but how we address them has constantly changed.
And how does that connect to our listeners today?
I think it challenges us to think about our own relationships. What are the primary purposes of our partnerships? Is it connection, structure, strategy, love, or maybe a mix of all of the above? And how has that balance shifted throughout your life?
Deep questions. I like it. I also hope this deep dive has encouraged our listeners to explore those historical periods or cultural practices that really piqued their interest. There's so much to learn from those who came before us.
Absolutely. Their experiences can offer valuable insights into our own relationships and societal norms.
So, to wrap things up, here's a final thought to ponder. Is this emphasis on romantic love as the foundation of marriage the final destination in this evolution? Or will other fundamental needs, maybe the need for community, stability, or even new ways of connecting in our complex world, reshape how we build relationships in the future?
That's the million-dollar question. Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure. The story of human connection is far from over.
And that's it for this episode of But Why Though? Join us next time as we continue to explore the origins of everything. Until then, stay curious.
And keep questioning.